Hi, this is Bob Burg, co-author of The Go-Giver. And if you really want to learn how to level up your life, you should be listening to the Time to Shine Today podcast with my good friend, Scott Ferguson.
Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. It is Scott Ferguson. We are at episode 200. I'm kind of in a fanboy moment now because I've always say that, two people's writings have really leveled me up and changed my life. And obviously people know about Andy Andrews with The Traveler's Gift, but also Bob Burg with The Go-Giver. He definitely lives the Go-Giver way. He's always saying, stay open to receptivity, but remember that giving comes first. And that is so true. I'm not going to say much right now because I really want you to sit back, relax. Bob carved out a half hour of his valuable time to come on. Make sure you break open your notebooks because I have pages upon pages of notes. So without further ado, here's my good friend, Bob Burg. Let's level up. Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. This is Scott Ferguson, and you hear me talk a lot about two specific people. There's Andy Andrews, and then there's Bob Burg. Bob Burg happens to be a kind of a neighbor here in South Florida, and you guys hear me always go back to the 5 laws of stratospheric success with the law of value, compensation, influence, authenticity, and receptivity. And I have the Bob Burg here today. And it's for our 200th episode. Bob, literally, I last minuted Bob, and he agreed to kind of come on. And we kind of rushed it through. And you can see his handsome mug here on board. And also, I always keep this on my desk, the 5 stratospheric laws of success. Every single day I go over them. And I'm always asking people how I can help them as well. It's generally agreed upon that entrepreneurship is the engine that drives an economy upwards and is primarily responsible for its growth. Entrepreneurs create jobs, bring better and more affordable products and services to the marketplace, resulting in greater societal health, overall wealth, and a vastly improved standard of living. Bob Burg is the co-author of the international bestseller, and I'm giving away 10 books. So make sure you listen to this all the way through because I'll have the giveaway at the end. He wrote the book, The Go-Giver. The Go-Giver changed my life. And I'm not bullshitting you, 100% did. Bob is a much sought after speaker at sales and leadership conferences, is committed to inspiring the entrepreneurial spirit in us all. He shows that companies, both large and small, that conduct their businesses the Go-Giver way are not only much greater value to their customers, they are also significantly more functional and profitable as well. He sold north of 1 million copies of it, and he's co-wrote it with John David Mann, who is, I read a few other ones. There's The Golfer's Carol and a couple other books that Bob co-wrote the book with, and he's an awesome, and I can see why the book just took off. And lastly, Bob is a badass. He's a Golden Gloves boxing champion. So we don't want to mess with this dude at all as well. So without further ado, Bob, come on, introduce yourself to Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. But first, Bob, what's your favorite color and why?
I would say turquoise.
Turquoise.
Yeah, I just like the color. Always have.
I love it. And we see like that huge, big Epsom salt thing that lives just to the east of us where we are here. And that's that perfect color turquoise when the sun hits it, right? I love that. I love it. And it's in your color wheel, my handsome friend. So let's get a little bit to the origins of Bob, like a little bit kind of, you came up through kind of sales managing and even a little bit of your boxing and then how you're doing. And you're such an awesome leader that people go to.
Oh, thank you. Well, it really started out in broadcasting as a sportscaster for a local radio station where I grew up. And then I got a job in TV as a news guy out in the Midwest, first as a reporter and then as the news anchor, the late night news anchor. But I really wasn't that good, Scott. And it wasn't going to end up being a career for me. So I got a job in sales, and I like to say I graduated into sales because it turned out to be a really great thing for me. Now, at first I floundered because I had no formal sales training, and the company where I was working, their training was, we'll say, negligible, right? Non-existent really. And so I really, for the first few months, I made a lot of calls and I saw a lot of people and I blah, 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 blah about my product or service, all those things that which is not the way to, sell when you get in front of someone. But as Jim Rohn would have said, I had the motivation, but not the information. And both are important. It's also not helpful to have the information and not the motivation, but you do need both. And fortunately, after a few months, I was in a bookstore looking for something. I didn't really even know what it was, but I found a couple of books on selling, which doesn't sound like a big deal these days. But 40 years ago, not everybody knew about those things. And the two books were by Tom Hopkins and Zig Ziglar, two legends in the sales space, of course. And I got their books, and I always say I never read them. I devoured them. And I would, after work every night into the wee hours of the morning, I'd be reading and highlighting and note taking and practicing and rehearsing and doing all this. And really within a few weeks, my sales began to just go through the roof. And there was no difference in me as a person at that point from 3 weeks earlier. Other than I now had a methodology, I had a system to follow, which was very encouraging to me. Because I'm not the type that invents the wheel,
Sure.
okay, or recreates the wheel. I'm the type who looks for the wheel that's already been created.
Yes.
I like to say I've never had an original thought in my life, but I've been good at implementing those things that are out there and then gearing it toward, more toward my own style and values and so forth. But really, I began to notice very quickly that a big part of learning sales was the personal development aspect. So I began getting all the books that were recommended to me, the How to Win Friends and Influence People,
Sure.
and The Magic of Thinking Big, and Think and Grow Rich, and As a Man Thinketh, and then books such as Og Mandino's The Greatest Salesman in the World, and Klassen's Richest Man in Babylon, and one of the best of all time, Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz, who teaches you really why we act as we do, how our belief systems that were given to us before we ever had the opportunity to even accept them really dictate how we see the world, and the way we see the world is the way we, right? And so all this was just, to me, it opened up doors, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, I loved it. I'm sorry, go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just going to say, eventually I was sales manager for another company. And as they used to say on the Seinfeld show, yada, 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 almost 40 years later, here we are talking.
I love that you kind of admit to a regurgitation. That's what we call it here at Time to Shine today. It's like you took bits and pieces, everybody, and kind of like regurgitated. I always say that with my clients that I coach and whatnot, I am regurgitating from all the way back to Marcus Aurelius and
sure, absolutely,
in Seneca, and everyone has actually kind of regurgitated, and I love it, and I see a lot of that in the writing in the Go Giver.
And when you read the Stoics, they'll tell you who they regurgitated from because they cite the other Stoics,
right?
So, yeah,
yes, exactly. So, Bob, when you're seeing, we're kind of going to jump forward a little bit, and when you're seeing somebody in some of your sales seminars, in the talks that you have, and people come up to you and they really want to level up, is there any secret sauce that you might have to help them find their blind spots?
Well, I think the very question itself is a brilliant question because it's typically blind spots.
Right.
It's that which we don't know. And, we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses.
Yes, sir.
I think weaknesses, and we have to say, lead with your strengths, of course, and we need to be able to understand those strengths. We need to embrace those strengths. That can be difficult because as human beings, we're very emotionally involved with ourselves, and it's sometimes difficult to see the greatness we have. That's those special things we have because we're just so used to, again, seeing the world through a certain lens.
Right.
If we can do this, well, everybody can do this, right? And that's how we don't embrace our value. And that's when we're selling for lower prices than we should be. We too easily negotiate down and so forth. But let's go back to those weaknesses and the blind spots. I think there are basically three types of weaknesses. There are the types of weaknesses you can ignore because it's just not a big deal. Okay. They're not going to harm anyone. They're not going to stop you from progressing. They're not going to cause anybody any harm. You can ignore those. Then there are the weaknesses we need to mitigate. Just as a personal example, I'm not the best when it comes to numbers, okay, and business plan, and the numbers with a business and things like. But it's important. So while I'm never going to be that expert, I'm never going to be an accountant, and I'm never going to have that total. That's never going to be my big strength. I needed to learn enough so that I'm able to work with that, and I have an understanding of them, so that when I then contract out with someone else who that is their strength, I'm able to speak intelligently about it. Okay, so just those types of things. Then there are those weaknesses we need to turn into strengths if we're going to be at our most effective, if we're going to be able to live up to our potential. Benjamin Franklin, who I learned so much from in his book, The Autobiography, which to
Yes,
me is just one of the books we should all read. And
absolutely.
early in his career, as you know, because I know you read that book, excuse me, he realized that he had certain character flaws, okay, weaknesses, if you will, that were not serving him, not serving others, and thus were going to hold him back from the kind of success that he wanted. So, of course, he was an inventor, and while there was no Dale Carnegie course at that time, or there was no Dale Carnegie, right? He
Right,
invented his own self-improvement course, right?
right.
And it was about improving his 13 different character traits that he did
Yes,
over the course of a year, one trait per week times 13 weeks, and 13 times 4 or 52, so you could go through the whole course 4 times in a year. That's a very abridged version, but
right.
I would recommend people get the book and
Yes,
and study that. But anyway, I did basically the same thing Ben did. I went through exactly as he. Again, I'm not recreating a wheel, right? I'm following someone who I know was very successful and who had issues in terms of character flaws that I had, although some of them were different, some were the same. But
right.
so I took my 13, and it
Okay.
made a huge difference in my life and in my success. But this is where, and we talk about the fourth law from the Go Giver, the law of authenticity. The most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself. And I think that people confuse, Scott, authenticity with being, this is how I am, take it or leave it, or they don't filter their speech because that's just who I am, and other, right? And I think that is so wrong, and I think it's so counterproductive. It's like the person who says, well, I have anger issues and I yell at people a lot, and if I were to act any differently, that wouldn't be authentic of me.
Right.
And of course, that's malarkey. That's baloney. It
Right.
simply means this person has an authentic problem
Right.
that they need to authentically work on in
Right.
order to become a higher, more effective, authentic version of themselves.
Right.
So blind spots, we go back to your great question. It's first recognizing them and or being open to others telling you, and being humble enough to listen. And
Yes.
you don't have to necessarily agree at first, but you can explore it and ask others who like, and trust, and who will
Right.
be honest with. And then once you've got a weakness that needs to be turned into a strength, now you can go from there.
I love it. Yeah, that's true, and that's where I have my little squad of people that I trust that will
Mhm.
call and be like, "Fergie, you need to kind of work on this," and I
Same
do. I
here.
make it into it. And so, Bob, is there when you're starting to work with a team or you're teaching and whatnot, you get approached a lot. I mean, you're a very successful person. Is there any good question that you wish people would ask you but never do?
I, I don't really think so. I think people ask the questions that they feel they need the answer to, and sometimes the best thing we can do is is very much listen, but also listen for the questions that they need to be asking, because they're not aware it's something that they need to be asking. But I wouldn't say there's one that I just wish people would ask me. I think the whole thing always begins, Scott, with awareness, and that's often awareness of what we don't know, or
Yes.
awareness that we don't know, and trying to figure that out. Adam Grant just wrote a wonderful book that just came out a few weeks ago at the time where we're doing this. It's called Think Again, and it really has to do with knowing that you don't know, that you can be wrong,
Mm,
right? And
absolutely.
not only being open to that, but really embracing that,
Yes.
and really having a desire to
Yes.
learn what you don't know. And I think especially right now, it's truly a book for its time, when so many people are living in their own echo chambers and they're basically listening to what those who they already agree with are saying and acting accordingly, as opposed to in a way that's a lot more constructive and productive.
I love that you said that because I'm hearing a lot of humility in that in itself. There's a saying that a tree with the most fruit is a tree that bends to the ground and is helping the most people along while they're
Mm.
going, right? So, I mean, that's where you're doing it. You might not even know you're doing it. I mean, Bob, you're actually planting trees and seeds that you might not ever sit in the shade of. You know what I'm saying? And
No,
that's
thank
what
you.
I strive to do, and other people that I decide to surround myself are striving to do. So, I'm going to throw a question at you, Bob. So you have a company, and hopefully I phrase this right, because I have it right on my wall and it comes straight from you, but how can I know if someone I'm talking to is a great prospect, connection, or a recommendation or referral for Bob Burg?
Right. Yeah, we call that the one key question that will
It's
separate you
literally on my
from the
freaking
rest.
wall, man.
Yeah.
It's literally there.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I take that as a great compliment, because so often when meeting someone, we're so consumed, we think we have to be that great conversationalist and be that fascinating person. But as I'll often say to my audiences, have you ever been in a conversation with someone who let you do all the talking, about yourself? And, didn't you come away from that conversation saying to yourself, wow, what a fascinating conversationalist that person is?
Right.
And that's because they let you talk about themselves.
Yes.
I've often said that, it's like when you're on the telephone, and I started out in sales on the telephone and taught a lot of people how to sell on the telephone. And I say, one thing I always noticed when I was selling on the telephone is nobody ever hung up the phone on me while they were talking. So I think to the degree we can focus on that other person, but it's a matter of doing that with the right questions too.
Right.
These need to be questions of value. So even if you're asking someone how they got started in their business when you first meet someone, that's not a slick or clever question, but it's a great question, because people love to talk about themselves and share their story. And how many people ask them to share their story, unless they're a celebrity, and most of us aren't, right? So how many people ask that person how they got started in their business, or asking that person, what do you enjoy most about what you do? I call that a feel good question. It just makes that person feel genuinely good about themselves, about the situation, and about you. Now, once you've established that rapport, now that key question, Dave or Mary, tell me, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good, and again, good prospective client for you, or a good prospect for you, or if they're not in sales per se, it would be a good connection for you, or someone you'd like to meet. And a good way to even frame that is to say, Dave, I always love connecting good people with other good people. Tell me, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good, and then, prospect or client or connection, whatever, for you? So yeah, you nailed that, Scott.
It's funny you asked that, or said that, and it's not funny. It's fantastic because I live by it now. But like, you have to be open to that fifth law also, because you're giving, right? And you make an analogy, and it was the Go Giver influencer, maybe no, it's a Go Giver in the bonus area. And I use this with my clients and anybody that's even talking to is like, you can give, and that's great. You're making the introduction, but you got to be open to that receptivity.
Sure.
And it's like you likened it to a plant. Like, I keep a plant in my room, and it's like I breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide, and the plant does the opposite. Right. So talk to me a little bit about actually being open to receptivity, because there's people that give, and they don't understand how to receive.
Yeah. You make a wonderful point there. And we say the law number 5, the law of receptivity, says the key to effective giving is to stay open to receiving. So, you breathe out, but you also have to breathe in. Right. It's not one or the other. You breathe out, again, carbon dioxide, you breathe in oxygen, while your plant is doing the exact opposite.
Right.
You breathe out, which is giving. You breathe in, which is receiving.
Yes.
Scott, unfortunately, the world around us gives us extremely, not mixed, but negative messages.
Absolutely,
about money, about prosperity, about abundance, about business. And if you listen to it and you read it, and you can't help it because it's everywhere, you would just think that people who have money got it nefariously and horribly and by stepping on others, and they're
Absolutely.
greedy and they're this. That's a big world. There's lots of people out there who do things in a way we don't like. But by and large, to the degree that you're participating in a free market-based economy, and when I say free market, I mean no one is forced to do business with you. The only way you can make a lot of money is providing exceptional value to the lives of lots of people, placing their interests first. Because remember, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet,
Yes.
right? They're not going to buy from you because you need the money or even because you're a really nice guy. They're going to buy from you because they believe they'll be better off by doing so than by not doing so. Then you have to do it authentically and you have to be able to receive. But what we know is this, that the giving comes first, right? It has to.
Yes,
and these are laws of life, right? You
Yes.
plant before you harvest, you sow before you reap. And so this is also why we say that, and John David Mann and I say this, and I think he coined it, and I want to credit him because he's such a brilliant writer. I mean, he's the guy who really is the lead writer of the team. and we say that money is simply an echo of value.
Yes.
Right. It's the thunder, if you will, to values lightning, which means nothing more than that the focus must be on providing value to that other person. Right. The value comes first. The money you receive is simply a very natural result of the value you've provided the marketplace or another individual or what have you. But you have to be able to receive it and get past so many of those horribly negative messages from the world around us that we don't carry on a conscious level.
Yes.
We carry on an unconscious level. That goes back to Maxwell Maltz, right? But people like Randy Gage, who's just a master of prosperity,
right?
Bob Proctor, Sharon Lecter, Ellen Rogan of Chicago, Ken Honda of Japan. Some of these people are just such wonderful writers and speakers on this topic. I always suggest look these people up, make a study of these people, make a study of prosperity proactively, because the garbage comes in all around us.
Oh my gosh,
from everywhere.
Yes. And I'm lucky enough to interview Randy, and his book, Why You're Dumb, Sick, and Broke, is just the best book. So Bob, you've seen the movie Back to the Future, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's get in that DeLorean with Marty McFly. Let's go back to the 22-year-old Bob Burg, Golden Gloves champion, that Bob. Is there any good knowledge nuggets? That's what we call him here at Time to Shine today. Any good knowledge nuggets you would drop on Bob to maybe help him shorten his learning curve, level up, or blast through just a little bit quicker?
Oh, absolutely. It would be very, very easy. That's probably one of my easiest answers. And because I would go back to the 22-year-old Bob Burg and I would say, young Bob Burg, shut up and listen. Stop talking, listen, because you don't know half of what you think you know. And I would say, Burg, young Bob Burg, you remind me of that saying attributed to Mark Twain, which there's no evidence he ever said, but it sounds very Twainian.
The brevity.
So, huh?
The brevity, maybe?
Yeah, no, he said he did, but what he's also credited with saying is, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you're absolutely positively sure you do know that just ain't so. And that was me. I thought I knew it all. I thought I had it figured out, and I didn't, not even close. So it was only a few years later as I began to really listen and become aware that I knew next to nothing, that my education really started and my growth began.
Yes, I love that. And that'll lead into, and then it's so true about the show, because I tell the younger Fergie to do the same thing. And I still tell him, and I'm 49 years old. So how do you want your dash remembered, Bob? That little line in between your incarnation date, your expiration date, your life date, and death date. How do you want Bob Burg's dash remembered?
I would say that Bob Burg carried on his dad's legacy and made people feel genuinely good about themselves.
Wow. And you think you're even close?
I don't know.
I think you are.
I've tried. It's something that I've made a point of Huh?
Yeah, my squad knows I'm a fanboy, and you have touched so many people, even within my squad. I mean, I'm on the 90,000 subscribers, and your book is on my website, everything, and people love it, and you are. So
Well, thank you.
you're humble, and it's fantastic. So, Bob, what keeps you up at night?
I think if there's, first of all, actually, other than some sleep apnea, not
I
a,
have it.
a
I wear
real,
my sleep hat, baby.
yeah,
So I'm
not
right
a real
there.
lot. But the only thing that would keep me up in terms of something I struggle with is, you know, have I come even close to reaching my potential? And I don't think so. I think there's a lot of areas in which I've made mistakes and areas that I've done things. Some people say, and it's sort of the, I guess, the political correctness of the personal development world, which you and I are both involved
Yes,
in
sir.
which you're supposed to, it's kind of like, well, yeah, and life, hasn't always been easy, but I wouldn't change a thing. No, I change a lot of things.
There's a few things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So, Bob, who has had a person who's had the biggest profound impact on your life, either business or personal?
Well, I was definitely blessed to be born to and raised to two great parents
Good.
who set a wonderful example for me. I'd say my dad is, the person who that I've tried to emulate. I think just like a daughter relates to her mom, a son relates to her dad, and a son relates to his dad in a very special way. And I've gotten to see my dad and how he dealt with others and how he worked with others. And again, how he always just had that, to him, a very natural way. With me, it was something I learned, but with him, a very natural, genuine interest in others and
Good.
really wanting to make people feel genuinely good about themselves. And he had such a special, wonderful way of doing that I've tried to emulate. So by far, he's been my, the biggest impact, my life mentor.
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. Like, what is the worst advice you've ever been given?
Worst advice? Oh, I mean, I would say it's people who said that, well, if you really want to make it in this world, you got to be ruthless and you got to be awful and you've got to be this, and you can be that way at work, but you can be a nice person at home. And I doubt that. I haven't seen too many examples of that, if any. But
that was me, Bob. When I was younger, I printed money selling real estate, and investing in real estate, and I did it I named my company Vulture Capital. So it was like I would prey on other people's misfortunes, and that came back and got me. And I've made those calls to every single person with an apology, whether they told me to go jump in a lake,
says a lot about
they
you.
accepted me.
Yeah.
Bob, what do you think people misunderstand about you the most?
About me?
Yes, sir.
I think if they don't know me well, they might misunderstand niceness with weakness.
Okay.
Because I think that's how they might see a title of a book like The Go-Giver. They might think it means that you get taken advantage of, or that you're just giving yourself away, or that you don't care about making a and all these things. So I think, as human beings, we make decisions based on very limited information.
Right.
So I think people sometimes, do that. And,
No, I appreciate that transparency, my man. What do you feel then is your definition of life well lived?
Well, I would say it's ultimately being happy. And I think in that case, you've got to define happiness because happiness can have different definitions. Now, the dictionary, a dictionary definition, which I believe works, it's very basic, but it's the mental feeling of well-being. And I think that's a good definition. Mine is a tiny bit more detailed. It's a genuine and ongoing feeling of joy and peace of mind, the result of living congruently with one's values.
Wow.
And I think when we do that, we create the context for happiness.
Yes, sir. That's fantastic. That's a staple to live by their squad. And hey, time to shine today, Podcast Varsity Squad. We are back with the Bob Burg, and we are going to bring Bob into our leveling up lightning round. And Bob, you and I could talk 15, 20 minutes, an hour on each one of these questions. You got 5 seconds, no explanation, no explanations. You ready to level up?
I will do my best.
You will rock it, I promise you. Bob, what is the best leveling up advice you've ever received?
Be inwardly motivated, but outwardly focused.
Yes. Share one of your personal habits that contributes to your success.
Reading.
Awesome. Other than your website and of course, the gogiver.com and timetoshinetoday.com, my shameless plug.
And I'd actually go with Burg.com.
And Burg.com.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What other website do you like to go to level up?
RandyGage.com, leadershipfreak.com.
Yeah. You're there?
I think leadershipfreakblog.com, I think actually is.
Gotcha.
Dan Rockwell's.
And Bob, if you're seeing me and you're thinking, Fergie, man, he must be in his doldrums and whatnot. And outside the Go Giver book, is there another book that you'd be like, Fergie, read this?
Yeah. Michael A. Singer's The Untethered Soul.
Okay.
Brilliant.
I will put that in the show notes, peeps. Bob, if you text, is there any emoji you like to use the most?
I'm sorry, if what?
When you text, is there any emoji you like to use the most?
Yeah, probably the wink.
The wink? Love it. Yeah. And also, and don't lie to me on this one, my friend. Physically.
I promise nothing.
Physically, if you could stay one age for the rest of your life and keep the wisdom you've gained and continue to garner knowledge, what physical age would you stay?
38.
I love it. As long as there's a 3 in front of that number, I'm okay with it. You know what I'm saying? All right. So, Bob, what's your favorite charity or organization that you like to give your time and or money to?
Well, Furry Friends Adoption and Clinic in Jupiter, Florida is my favorite. But there's a young lady who I'm connected with on Twitter she is in India, and she feeds all the street dogs and cats on the streets of India. So I actually give a lot to her as well through her, what's the name of the blog? The little thing where you can
the handle
through PayPal. Where you can do
okay.
That. Yeah.
And I'll put her handle. I'll get the handle from you.
Oh,
later,
thank you.
I'll put it in the show notes.
And I mean, she takes all her money. I mean, she's not
awesome.
A wealthy one. She takes her heart, soul, money, everything, and she goes out there and feeds those street dogs and cats. She's amazing.
Love it, Bob. And last question, you can expand on this a little bit, elaborate. But what's the best decade of music? 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s?
80s.
80s, me too. Big hair, don't care. You got so much that happened in that decade with rap and big hair and
had a whole bunch of different.
Yes. All right. So, Bob, how can we find you?
Best place is Burg, BURG.com. I try to keep things simple.
Love it. No, I love it. And all of his handles and everything will be in the show notes, people. And also the book, The Go Giver. I'm purchasing 10 books, and one of them I'm going to get signed by Bob. And it'll all be on Time to Shine Today's dime, have it signed by Bob and send out the other 9. If you reply or comment on any of Time to Shine Today's handles, the first 10 will get a book. And also you have to put it in there, and I want you to put in there the Bob Burg, and I'll know that you've actually listened to it. So we will get you that book right out to you. So Bob, leave us with one last knowledge nugget that we can take with us, internalize, and take action on, please.
I think it's something that a gentleman said to me, I guess about 38 years or so ago, because about 40 years or so I got into sales, and it was a couple of years afterwards, and I was in a sales slump, and I was very focused on myself, and which is just the opposite of where we need to be. And I think he saw me sort of as Joe in The Go Giver, who I'd write about with John David Mann years and years later. He saw me as the up and coming, young, ambitious, aggressive, after it salesperson who was not in any way living up to his potential. And he said to me, Burg, he was a last name kind of guy. He said, Burg, can I give you some advice? I said, absolutely, please do. And he said, if you want to make a lot of money in sales, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your target, he said, is serving others. Now, when you hit the target, you'll get a reward, and that reward will come in the form of money, and you can do with that money whatever you choose. But never forget, he said, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It ain't the target itself. Your target is serving others. And that's when it hit me, Scott, that great salesmanship is never about the salesperson. Great salesmanship is never about the product or service, as important as those are. Great salesmanship is about the other person. It's about those lives you choose to touch. It's about that person's life being at least a little better because
Yes.
you are part of it.
I love that. And Squad, you just had literally a free masterclass from Bob Burg. We had a little Burg and Ferg half hour here.
Ah,
And Bob, he
I like that.
graduated. Bob graduated in sales. He wants you to devour info and get the reps in. He wants you to embrace and lead with your strengths, but also recognize your weaknesses with 3 points. You can ignore one of the weaknesses, mitigate and understand them, and the ones you can turn into strengths. And I like to say with my good friend Leah Woodford, will say, get your asking gear. Ask your friends that you trust to help turn those weaknesses into strength. We want you to not confuse your authenticity. If you're acting like an asshole, don't confuse that with just being yourself. Be a person that's going to serve others. And when you're talking to people, listen for questions that they might be asking and try to pull those questions out of them so you can learn even more about the people. Bob will remind us that everything begins with awareness of what we don't know. And going back to Bob's question of, how will I know if I'm talking to you? Who would be a great referral connection? That is a very valuable question. And Bob made a point that people that you're talking to on the phone never hang up when they're talking. So let them talk. He's going to be reminded, he's going to be somebody that's remembered as someone to provide exceptional value to the lives as many people, and they will be better off. He reminded us that money is an echo of values. So focus on value to the person and that money will come. He would have told his younger self, shut up and listen. Okay. And what you think you do know can get you into trouble. So always be open to learn and progress. He's going to remind us to strive to reach our potential. Don't be ruthless, be loving, be generous. There's a time to be ruthless, but don't be that on a daily basis because it's a turnoff. I'll tell you that right now. Bob's, life well lived is ultimately to be happy, genuine, ongoing feeling of peace of mind, and living with one's values that his father passed on to him. And lastly, don't have making money as your target. Your target should be helping others and serving others, and that money will just be an echo, like he said, of the value that you put out. And Bob, you level up your health, you level up your wealth. You're humble, yet you're hungry. You're always go-giving. I'm in fanboy moment. Thank you so much for coming on. I love your guts, and I can't wait to collaborate with you in the future on something.
Love you as well, my brother. Thank you so much for having me. You're awesome.
You bet, Bob. Talk soon.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Time to Shine Today podcast. Proudly brought to you by Sutter & Nugent Real Estate Excellence, who can be reached at 561-249-7266 and online at www.sutterandnugent.com. If you are a business owner or professional who would like to be interviewed on Time to Shine Today, please visit timetoshinetoday.com/guest. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. There's a link in the show notes to our website. Also there, you will see our recommended resources. We hope that you will support our show by supporting them. If you like what you've been listening to, it'd be great if you could just give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe while you're at it. I'm your host, Scott Ferguson, and until next time, let's level up. It's our time to shine.